Dead, we're live.
Hey, thanks again, Larry the Liberty Guy. And as this is our last broadcast of this week for Sunday, you all know what it is. It's a big day. So let me wish everybody a happy People Who Inseminate Day to those of you who fit that category, because last month we celebrated Happy Birthing People Day. You got to just laugh. I mean, this is seriously how they want us to talk and think. Happy Father's Day from a proud American father who celebrated a great Mother's Day last month with our family. It's our favorite day of the year. I'll tell you why in a second, and that'll be Sunday. But today's on through a different lens. It's the worst day of the legislative year, and I'll explain that to you. First of all, today I am going to cover the topic I promised you I'd cover yesterday, the South Kingston update on the union, that bogus union mailer. Give you an update on the TCI gas tax, how it's moving through the General Assembly, what you can do about it. Big announcement yesterday from the National Department of Education. Sadly, it's time we need to save women's sports, or to save potential birthing people's sports. Talk about that. Media release we'll talk about from our friend Dr. Michelle Cretella. She won't join us today, but we'll talk about their release. Upcoming guest in about 15 or so minutes will be Representative Patricia Morgan, talking about the General Assembly, the new speaker, the budget, and other bills of interest. We're going to cover a lot of ground in 10, 12 quick minutes with her. And then our last half hour today, as always on Thursday, will be Dr. Andrew Bostom. You know, the COVID fear mongers just keep continuing. They just can't stop. They've gotten into their rhythm. They love this control they're exerting over all of us. They can't stop. Next week, I don't know the days yet, but I think we're going to have attorneys on. We may have told you last year, Gatsby Project, the coalition partners of ours, were plaintiffs in a lawsuit challenging some campaign election finance laws in this state. They had oral arguments last week, so we're going to hear from some of the attorneys about that who represented the Gatsby Project, and we're going to have two guests, an op-ed writer and someone from a national group, talking about the proposed sugary drink tax. They just these people just think they know that if we tax something, it's going to make people healthier somehow. I mean, it's crazy stuff. We're going to talk about it next week. All right, let's get into batting practice. And since it's going to be mostly Rhode Island stuff today, I'll go with the good old URI Rhode Island cap. All right, Sunday is Father's Day. Yes, that includes People Who Inseminate Day. It's a great day for me. I get to spend time alone with my two sons, both well grown. Don't get to do that very often. Kind of a field of dreams start. We go out, we play some catch, hit some fly balls to each other out of the nearby field. We have some lunch, an early or a late breakfast. We smoke a cigar, maybe have a bourbon, play a few rounds of three-way cutthroat cribbage. And we just the three of us. We don't get a chance to do that very much anymore. And then we'll go over to my parents' house later in the day, where my mom will make the greatest dry rub ribs, even better than any restaurant I've been to in the South. That's my request for the day. And God bless my mom. She's still in her mid 80s, still able to do all that wonderful stuff that has made her such a great mom. I hope, and my dad, I'll get to see him. My dad's not too fussy about food anymore. He just likes to have everyone together. So again, happy Father's Day if you're a father or to your father. And thank you for joining us on In the Dugout. Okay, the TCI gas tax, the Transportation and Climate Initiative, I did see in the Journal pass the Senate Committee on Agriculture and Environment yesterday. I didn't get to see what the vote total was. I think there's only one Republican on that committee. Gordon Rogers, I'm sure he voted against it. but they haven't posted the actual votes yet. So we'll update you on that. But there is, so this is it's gonna be up for a full Senate vote next Tuesday, the 22nd. Is that the right day? Yeah, Tuesday, the 22nd. And it's going to pass the Senate. The only hope is that the House will slow it down. There's a lot of pressure. Our coalition, and others are putting on the speaker, on House members behind the scenes. The governor is a lost cause on this. Just still can't believe this governor thinks he's a small business proponent when he's passing act on climate bills, minimum wage bills, and he would gladly sign into law, apparently, this TCI gas tax bill. Somebody tell me how this is how you can be pro-business when you're passing taxes that affect every small business in the state. But you can help. So again, if you go to rifreedom.org/TCI, just put in TCI. If you haven't done this yet, this is the same petition that's been up for a while. But if you haven't signed it yet, or if you haven't promoted it to your networks yet, via email, on social media, on Twitter, on Facebook, or just by word of mouth, again, we're trying to mount some pressure. We're trying to save our state from some devastating new costs on energy that will not just raise the costs on everybody and make our state less competitive. Remember, included in the design of this bill is to steadily decrease the supply of available gasoline. They're going to decrease that supply of gasoline infinite times faster than any of us are going to be ramping up on green cars or electric cars or anything like that. So if you're old enough to remember the great gas lines of the 1970s under Jimmy Carter, when OPEC cut production or stopped production, and the gasoline shortages we had in America, they're coming back in Rhode Island. So say no, rifreedom.org/TCI, and please promote and sign that petition. All right, yesterday I was supposed to give you an update on the South Kingston situation, not so much with Nicole Solis, although it ties in the critical race theory stuff and the curriculum stuff and the school committee, but another school district related issue in South Kingston we talked with Roland Benjamin. In fact, we might try to get him back on next week. Let's remember that, Larry. But you may recall that in trying to pass a bond referendum that would have wastefully built a whole new school, physical school buildings that they don't need down there. The unions were behind it. The unions asked for and received mailing names and addresses of students in the school district as young as second grade, according to some reports. And then they actually mailed them political mailers saying, vote for the school bond. I mean, first of all, what is the logic in that? And second of all, why the hell is the South Kingston School District giving out the names and addresses of its enrolled student base and population from its database? And again, it's because this is just how unions operate. And in South Kingston, don't forget, in South Kingston, Sarah Markey is on the school board. She is a National Education Association executive. I'm sure she was the one behind the threat to sue Nicole Solis. I'm also sure she was the one behind this. And it's been disclosed that it was the unions who received the mailing list because it was a union-funded flyer that went out to all these households in South Kingston. This union influence in our school system is crushing public schools, is harming students, is immoral and illicit, and it may even be illegal. According to a Providence Journal report yesterday by reporter Katie Mulvaney, the public relations firm that was hired to do the mailer Checkmate Consulting, Brad Dufault, son of Guy Dufault, longtime political union operative, as it turns out, a former neighbor of ours in Warwick, is being subpoenaed by the town council, but he's refusing. The union and legal advice refusing to cooperate. They're launching an investigation how these names got out. Now, that's the sub issue, right? How these names got out. Why Superintendent Linda Savastano acknowledged that she did acknowledge that she gave the mailing lists of all the students to a group called Friends of South Kingston Schools, known union ties. The Friends deny it, but she gave the list to someone who's on there high up in their ranks. I don't know if they're a volunteer or what kind of organization. Savastano claims she thought she was giving it to the organization when really she was giving it to just a member who belonged to that organization. But we know where it ended up. It ended up in Friends of South Kingston Schools. It ended up in the union's hands. And these second graders and sixth graders and elementary school and middle school and high school students are getting mailers when they can't even vote. It's almost harassment. It's almost child abuse. The bigger question here, the bigger issue at hand here is like the Nicole Solis story. This is undue, just immoral union influence over public schools. And perhaps nowhere is it worse than in South Kingston, because as we warned years ago, one of their executives sits on that school committee. And we knew that union tactics and union thuggery was going to be brought into that school system and other policies and decisions and rulings and ordinances that would be against the taxpayers, against the students, and in favor of the union. And that has happened multiple times over in South Kingston. So that's the update. There is an investigation going on. The superintendent seems to be culpable in this. So far, Sarah Markey's name has been kept out of this, but we're going to monitor this closely because this has been, the crux of our argument for years, that the unions are crushing the chance for educational reforms in this state, the teachers' unions. Teachers' unions committed, as they've said publicly from their national conferences, their number one priority is advancing a social justice agenda. The number one priority of both of the major teachers unions is not to educate kids. Just think about that for a minute. Just think about that. All right, let's move on. This is another Save Women's Sports. And this is another one of those items that fits under the To This We've Come category. I mean, can you actually believe that some of this stuff is going on? Now let me show you the sort of the headline first. So this is the beginning of a media release from the American College of Pediatricians. That's our friend, Dr. Michelle Cretella. She was unable to join us today because this just came out earlier today, and it was too short notice to have them join us, their release. But the national, in Washington, the Department of Education has now officially put out an advisory that included in Title IX. That's in theory, that's a good law that ensures that women have access to, let's use the term, women have, in fairness, that women have the same access to sports that men have. Well, maybe not exactly the same, but comparable levels of access. That's fair, right? Well, their new ruling says that transgender women, in other words, men who now pretend to be women, can compete against women in any school that's subject to Title IX rules. Now, that is patently unfair. I'm going to get into a little more, so according to the media release, let me read from it. Schools will now be forced to allow biologically male students access to female-only spaces. They will be housed with females during overnight school trips and events. They will be able to participate in female-only sports and displace other females, real females, from female-only sports and other teams. This interpretation, according to the American College of Pediatricians, this interpretation advisory by the Department of Education is unscientific and a clear threat to the health and safety of female students. Now, I want to show you 1 minute of a video that is put out by a group that we're closely aligned with, the Independent Women's Forum. This is all women, experts in so many different fields, just tremendous spokespeople for, I don't know if it's conservative, libertarian, small government, how they would define themselves. But let me share this page with you and show you this video. So this is female athlete stories. It's under their larger push to save women's sports. These are real stories from real athletes. You see this mom right here. This video is going to be about her and her daughter. I'm going to stop sharing because I forgot to put it on to maximize audio and video. So here we go. It'll take me a second. So let's play 1 minute of this video, and you tell me if you think this is fair.
I had the opportunity to compete at the World Championships in Malaga, Spain in 2018. I had put in so much hard work for this meet, as did my teammates for Team USA. When I got to the meet, I discovered that a biological male was in my race. Not only has this happened to me, but a year later, my daughter ran her first high school race against a biological male identifying as a female. You
can see here is the male pretending to be a female and believing it, running. Now you watch how this male quickly overtakes how much stronger, bigger, faster, and you tell me if you think this is fair. This boy just blowing by the girls, literally blowing by them. Look at the lead here. Here's the boy. Here's the closest girl, and that's the woman you just heard, daughter. Look at that distance. It's not even close. It's nowhere close to being fair.
It was my first ever high school track meet my freshman year. I ended up taking second in my race next to this biological male, and I would have won my first ever high school track meet if it weren't for this athlete.
So, I was an athlete. Winning races, winning medals are important for your application in your high school resume. Certainly in my case, extracurricular activities. I played basketball, I played baseball, I was in the band. Those all helped round out my application, and I was pretty, listen, I was a good student too, but they helped round out my application and allowed me to get accepted into Harvard and Brown and Yale and even Dartmouth, I think. Yeah, for 4. But now many women are going to be denied opportunities to have those credentials on their applications and on their personal resumes. It's just not fair, folks. I mean, rights, they want to claim rights. Keep this in mind. Nothing can be a right if it infringes on somebody else's right. When we have a right to free speech, it doesn't infringe on anyone else's. When we have a right to carry a firearm or bear arms, it infringes on no one else's right But that's why healthcare can't be a right, for instance, because somebody else has to either pay for it or provide it, and that's an infringement on them. It's not a right for boys to be able to compete in girls' sports because it is unfair and it infringes not on a right. It's not a right to be able to compete fairly, but it certainly is a privilege. So in this case, it's a privilege. You can't have rights or privileges if they infringe on other people unfairly, especially in this case. So let me read a little more from the American College of Pediatricians from their media release, and we'll talk about that, and then we'll get on with our guests here. So we talked about how this interpretation, I mean, this is all political correctness, right? There's no scientific, for a left wing that likes to say follow the science, there is no scientific basis, as they say here. This interpretation is unscientific. Listen to this from the American College of Pediatricians. Acknowledging inborn genetic sex differences is crucial for creating sound public policy, which is a fact the Department of Education has now chosen to ignore. The scientific bottom line is that acknowledging the innate differences between males and females is critical to ensuring the health and safety of our children, and in this case, female students. The American College of Pediatricians believes that sex is a biological trait of medical significance. It's not just a talking point. It has medical significance. Who can argue with that? And it provides scientific evidence against allowing males to access female-only spaces, sports teams, and the like. Said Dr. Michelle Cretella, quote, among humans, sex is a dimorphic, innate, and immutable trait established at fertilization by sex-determining genes located on the X and Y chromosomes. This sexual dimorphism is genetically programmed and is present in every nucleated somatic cell of the body. Sex does not and cannot change. So no matter how many hormones you take, how many mutilating surgeries you have, and as I've said before, and I hate to be cynical, but I am, no matter how many times you click your ruby red shoes together and wish it were so, as it says right here, sex does not and cannot change. Dr. Cretella goes on to say, with this unscientific interpretation, female students lose their rights to privacy and safety in education and fair play in sports. Due to a combination of genetic and sex hormones, males are bigger, stronger, and faster than females. Males are also more violent and aggressive than females. Males who self-identify as female, including those who take estrogen, remain genetically male and therefore have no objective reason, let alone a right, to share restrooms and locker rooms or to be housed with or competing against females. The American College of Pediatricians condemns the Department of Education's new interpretation of Title IX protections and calls on the department to embrace science and protect girls now. As the Independent Women's Forum would say, it is time to save women's sports. And we're going to try to have somebody from the Independent Women's Forum on next week to talk about this. We've got some good relations and contacts there, and we'd like to make them a regular part of it. Folks, this is just more from the left's Never Never Land of make-believe. And somehow it continues to dominate public policy and our culture, and none of it is real. It's all pretend. It's all hyped, media hyped, and you want to look at cancel culture, they're canceling science right here. So let's move on. And I think it's time to move to our first guest. So today, probably right around now or later this evening, the House in the Rhode Island General Assembly is going to release their 2022 fiscal year budget. So here to discuss what's happened so far in the session, what's likely to be included in the budget, and what may happen in the future. Let's bring in our great friend, Representative Patricia Morgan, the representative from West Warwick and Coventry area, former gubernatorial candidate, former minority leader of the House caucus. Patricia, Rep. Morgan, thank you back. Thank you, and welcome back in the dugout.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
Yeah. Okay, so listen, before we get into any details, I know you've got some issues, I've got some questions for you, and we're going to get through very quickly. But the one discussion I'd like to have, this is the first year, we have a new governor, obviously, everybody knows that, but and I think everybody understands, we also have a new Speaker of the House.
Mhm.
Now, Speaker Mattiello always claimed that he was the firewall against the far left, hard left, progressive agenda. And while we criticize him for that, we called him more of a leaky sieve than a firewall. It certainly seems that with Speaker Shikarchi, the floodgates are wide open to the progressive left. Your thoughts on the new speaker and the differences?
Mattiello actually, I think, did hold back a lot of progressive legislation, and I don't see Speaker Shikarchi doing that. Usually the big bills like the $15 minimum wage, the Promise Rhode Island, that is permanent now. There are some bills that he has already passed through, which normally would have been held until the end of the session and only passed because the speaker needed the votes for the budget. But instead, Speaker Shikarchi has passed them early. I mean, the Act on Climate, all of these are very progressive, I think very harmful things for the people of Rhode Island. They're already off the table. So either you have to, I think what you have to get from that is either the progressive side of the party is so powerful now, or that Speaker Shikarchi actually agrees with these policies, and that's why he pushed them through.
Yeah, and we know that Speaker Mattiello had to horse trade to get those votes, but you're right. Maybe Speaker Shikarchi is on their team right from day one. All right, a few questions. Again, we're going to go through these pretty quickly here. So first of all, of number one concern to us is the Transportation and Climate Initiative. The Senate committee passed the bill yesterday. The Senate will vote on the full floor next Tuesday. I'm sure it's coming to the House. We've put on a pressure campaign against others. What are you hearing in the House? Is there any way to stop this thing in the House of Representatives?
If it comes to the floor, there's no way to stop it.
Right.
I think you know that.
Yeah.
Let me put in a pitch for good people to run for office so that we can stop these things, because we now have, who voted against the Act on Climate? I think we got 14 or 15 votes. I think you'll get the same one on the TCI. We shouldn't be in it. It's going to raise the cost of everybody, but can we stop it? No.
All right. And the governor seems not to be willing to fight against it either. Now, staying on the tax front, income taxes. The union progressive left are really pushing for income taxes. This is like the sixth mailer I've received this year. Basically all misinformation by unions. The media is reporting that the governor and the speaker aren't keen on new taxes, especially income taxes. Are you hearing anything different?
Yeah, I don't think that will pass this session. There's just so much money from all of the federal dollars that have come into the state. I know we're coming back in September to deal with even like this. I think the money that's in the budget now is what came under the Trump administration. In September, we're going to come back and deal with all the money that's coming in from the Biden, this new Congress. So I don't think there's a need for new taxes. So I don't think that will be passed.
All right, let me jump ahead, more procedural. And again, we understand you're not part of Speaker Shikarchi's leadership team or in the Senate. Your best guess. I mean, they're talking now about a fall session to determine what to do with that over $1 billion, 1.5 billion, 1.2 billion, whatever, however you count it, of emergency relief COVID funds. Do you think that will be the only topic they'll cover in the special fall session, or do you think other undone business is going to get lumped in? In other words, if something doesn't make it to the finish line in June, is it done for the year, or do you think it could come back in the fall session? Something other than that emergency spending?
I think anytime the legislature meets, there will be other things that will come into that session. Clearly, they're going to be handing out money in September, or it's in the September frame, right? It's whenever that money becomes available, they know how much it is. But other things are going to be on the table, absolutely. Now, I don't think we're going to get recreational marijuana, just from what I could be wrong. I'm not in the inner circle, as you know, but there's so many issues with Rhode Island. You know, other states are not as dependent upon federal jobs. We have EB, we have Textron, who does the radar arrays, or whatever, sonar arrays, all of the suppliers that are hooked into those two big and large manufacturers here. So I think that's not going to get done in this session.
All right, last question for you. And again, we just got to keep rolling here. The pay equity bill, it's passed in the Senate. The House held it up basically a few years ago. Do you have any insight on that bill, which would put so many employers in legal risk?
I don't have any insight. I'll be honest with you. I just don't know.
All right. I know there's a number of pieces of legislation, whether it's in the budget or separate from the budget, you'd like to talk about. Go. What's number one?
All right. These were passed yesterday.
All right.
House Bill 5238 gave in-state tuition to illegal immigrants.
Continued the
that's
practice,
always
right?
Been just kind of out there. They've been doing it under the covers. Well, now they passed a bill.
Oh, okay. So before it was sort of by order, now it's codified into law.
It's codified into law.
Okay, got it. All right. Next. Wow. So that's going to cost taxpayers more.
Yeah,
it is. And that's going to be a magnet, right? As well.
It's a magnet. You know, it's just about people who have only been here 3 years can get in-state tuition. They really haven't contributed to the system.
Yep.
And the rest of us have for a long, long time.
And the rest of us have to pay for it. Number two.
Right. 5328 mandates composting by our schools. Representative Fenton Fung actually crunched the numbers on this. So if you just have regular waste, it's $45 a ton. If you have composting waste, it's $115 per ton. This is going to cost Cranston alone over $60,000.
Wait a minute, I'm not sure what the bill says. What do you mean high school composting?
So all of the food scraps, not high school, public school, composting. Any food, leftover food from the lunchrooms, from wherever.
Has to be thrown away separately.
That food be collected by composters, and they are charging $115 a ton.
That's the tipping fee, in other words.
That's the tipping fee. It will cost Cranston $60,000.
So in other words, now school officials have to basically recycle food in a sense, in the same way we recycle our trash from our recyclable goods. Now we got to recycle compost and food goods from regular trash.
That's right. It's going to cost them.
Not just tipping fees, but manpower, right? More manpower, right?
Well, listen, one of the things that I thought was so disgraceful is Representative Anastasia Williams got up and said, oh, you're talking about budgets and what it's going to cost. This is about composting, how good composting could be. And it's like these people don't understand that budgets have to be met. And if they're not met with existing funds, you got to go to the taxpayers and get more.
Access more. All right. Number three, go ahead.
I forgot the number of this bill, but it's the Rhode Island Health Information Exchange. It's always been where you can opt in to have so this is the exchange where medical personnel can go in from all different sources or different areas and access your medical information. It's always been an opt-in. Well, now it's an opt-out. So there's a huge difference.
So unless you're on the ball and opt out, your medical information can be shared?
Yes, and my doctor actually asked me to opt in once before, and I read the document, and the document itself said there was no way they could guarantee that your medical information would not be seen by unauthorized people. So people in the billing department or in, the
Well, the
x-ray
government
department.
Big Brother just wants to know everything about us, don't they?
But now it's opt out, and I just encourage everybody who doesn't want their medical information
All right, opt
out
out
there
your
to
ass.
opt out. And
Okay,
then
what else you got?
the last one was 6004. This was sponsored by Rep. O'Brien. And this is the beginning of electronic voting. They're covering it with, this is for overseas veterans.
Electronic voting?
Electronic voting, that's right. No longer, because the Secretary of State can't get those ballots to the people overseas so they can get them back in time. Now we're going to figure out how to let them vote electronically. And they've also extended it to people with disabilities. And it's a big amorphous category, disabilities. So this is the
What security
of
measures are in
electronic
place
voting.
for that?
But this is what you should know, Sten, or Mike. The Board of Elections opposed it. The Secretary of State opposed it. Health and Human Services, the federal government, HHS, Homeland Security said, no, we can't do this. It can't be secure. It is too vulnerable to fraud.
And this bill passed the committee or passed the entire House?
Passed the House. And by the way, Congressman Langevin's Committee on Cybersecurity said bad idea. So you've got all the experts, Board of Elections, Secretary of State, Homeland Security, and
what's that bill number again? I got to look that one up later.
6004.
All right, thank you. All right, last question. I'm sorry, our time is short today.
All right.
We'll have you back to discuss.
This is like rapid, whatever you call it.
Yeah, it is. Do you expect right now any House Republican votes in favor of this budget? We haven't seen it yet, but still, I think we all know what it's going to look like. Do you expect any House Republican support?
I doubt it.
Okay.
I doubt it.
All right, Patricia Morgan, you are a wealth of knowledge. We need to have you back as we, let's review the budget together in the next week or so. Okay.
Sounds great.
All right, Pat Morgan, Representative Morgan, thank you very much for being with us on In the Dugout.
Thank you.
Okay, it's that time of the week again when our favorite guest, Dr. Andrew Bostom, joins us. Andy, welcome back to In the Dugout.
Hi, Mike.
It's got to be frustrating for you. I don't know what the word is, gratifying for me that everything you've talking to us about is slowly the rest of the country is now realizing on so many fronts. And you've been the non-conventional wisdom voice on this show. You've taken some arrows. We've taken some arrows. I've taken some arrows from my own supporters, my own board members. Who's this person saying all these things that don't comply with what we're hearing from everyone else? And we stuck with you, and we're going to get into some of that soon with your concerns about the vaccine and with masks and all that. But I'm so busy today, I didn't get a chance. Was there a governor's press conference today? And if
Yes,
so,
there was. There was very brief. It was kind of abbreviated. But, Mike, the same themes, they don't change. So in other words, today, Dr. Scott wasn't there, but Dr. Chan was there. And they're still using the fear of variance, in other words. So you may have seen some more. Actually, it's a good thing they haven't had Dr. Jha up there, or maybe it's a bad thing. He's so hysterical that it might have actually been
here's the
comic relief to have him up there.
Here's the hysterical headline in yesterday's Providence Journal.
Right. No, but Mike, honestly, I think he's so over the top that perhaps if he had been there, that the public would have realized, wait a minute, it can't, it's not this bad.
All right. So
maybe there would have been a benefit having.
All right. So what about the Delta variant?
So this is what caused the spring spike in India. which mercifully is gone. It was an intense spike for them.
It's already done.
It's done. It's over with. They're basically they're through with it. Its intense period was really, I would say, from mid-March to maybe mid-May. It's dropped. Their all their clinical indices, particularly their hospitalizations and deaths, but their cases have dropped off precipitously. And you have to realize, Mike, that even now, let alone a month ago, they've still only vaccinated 3.5% of their population.
Wow.
So this has mostly to do.
It's not apples to apples.
Acquired immunity. And the virus itself, whatever the intricacies are that we're not even that clear on in terms of seasonality effects, other effects we don't understand. That and the immunity that it confers once the susceptibles have been infected, and unfortunately those who succumb to it, but those who have mild infections, the whole gamut of infections. That cycle has run its course in India with obviously minimal impact of the vaccines.
All right, let me ask you a few questions that were in this headline that jumped out to me. So just quickly, is it the most contagious strain?
It looks to be maybe a little more contagious than the Kent variant, the UK variant. Yes, that's an interesting thing too, Mike. This is very important. So it's well known that the UK has a big immigrant community from the entire Indian subcontinent, both Hindus and Muslims, Pakistan, India. Those communities in the more recent period in the UK, which by the way is doing very well overall, those communities saw an uptick with this variant. It honestly, Mike, the ONS, their national statistics from the UK put out raw data, which anyone could look at. I looked at it and I was reassured by it because it actually looked like the hospitalization rate, even in this period of a total decline in the UK, the hospitalization rate in those areas that were hit by the Delta variant and the overall mortality was no higher than the existing background UK variant. It's the same story over and over again. But yeah, I get it.
Is it the deadliest? Is it the deadliest?
Yeah, it's just not. It's just not. Look, in Mike, here's the final numbers for India, as far as we can tell, since both the United States and India are pretty burned out as far as COVID goes. India has had a COVID mortality of 28 per 100,000. We in the United States have 183 per 100,000. So how are they? Per
100,000 cases or per population?
Per capita. Per capita. I mean, we have 6.5 fold the death rate of India. Why worry about? I mean, there's never. But Mike, this is what's happened for 16 months going now. None of this basic epidemiologic data is presented in perspective. Now, if you want to talk about that very sharp rise in India, by all means talk about it, but contextualize it. At a certain point, they were, because it's also, you have to realize, remember, you're dealing with 1.6 billion people. They were accumulating cases at a truly frightening rate, if you don't adjust for population, at about 300,000 a day. I mean, so that's a scary number. Right. But the overall statistics are actually show that in a young overall population, even a population with pockets of really abject poverty, this is the mortality that they accrue.
All right. The headline also says that is there such a thing as being medically, quote, evasive? The most evasive. What the heck does that mean?
Like I have to laugh at this point because you could, if you go back a couple of cycles, we'll see things like this describing previous variants. I mean,
what does evasive even mean? What's he trying to say there?
What it could mean is that in certain hands, in a certain laboratory, using an in vitro or and not a whole testing system, not a whole human system, not a whole animal system. It wasn't neutralized as well by certain antibodies. I don't know what this means anymore, Mike. So in the end, by the way, when you do more elaborate studies that really try to mimic, you know, the in vivo, the in the body situation, people with past infections, people vaccinated appropriately, they seem to be able to handle these variants well enough so that they wouldn't become a clinical problem. But the proof is in the pudding. When you see what actually happened in India, when you see what actually happened in these Asian populations in the UK, when you see what's happened elsewhere, these things don't pan out, and it's the same cycle over and over again.
All right, let's switch gears. Let's switch gears. You've been right. Here's another thing you've been right on. Kids and other people shouldn't have to wear a mask. Now, I've seen this in a bunch of different headlines.
Mike, the reporter who broke this is, and you actually want to interview her, is Jennifer Cabrera. She's the rarest of the rare. She's
all right. Let me finish explaining first. They found all kinds of bacteria and other dangerous crap in the mask that the kids are breathing, right?
Mike, I've known about these data for a while. It took a long time, I guess, to convince the lab to go public because of the blowback they were afraid of. This was a University of Florida Gainesville lab. They've had these data, I think, for a couple of months now. But basically, Jennifer covered the story. It was parents that got together, and they actually, it's very, very bright. You should see the woman. One of the women who was involved with this was interviewed on Fox and Friends this morning, and you can see she's very articulate, very bright. Basically, here's what they did. They took the masks from kids 5-6 hours in class. I think they were 6 to 11 years old. They brought them to this lab for testing particularly for bacteria, because you have to realize viruses are so small. They're not going to be, that was part of the point. They're not going to be captured on a mask. But at any rate, they also used control masks. In other words, masks that were clean and not worn. And one other control was to literally take a sample, a cutout from a kid's shirt, and test that as well. Well, it was very innovative, I thought. It wasn't a randomized control trial, but they tried to control as best they could. Obviously, the unused masks, the piece of cloth from the kid's shirt, they didn't collect all these bacteria, but the masks after 6 hours or so of use did. And these were bacteria that could cause meningitis, that could cause pneumonia, that could cause sepsis. So there's something accumulating in them that may not be healthy. Now, some of them also cause
some of this kind of stuff is accumulating in them. This from our friend Stephen Moore, who puts out an email every day.
Right.
I mean, we're not going to go through them in detail. Just look at all these pathogens and stuff that have been found in these masks.
What brought this to the attention of these concerned parents was skin infections underneath the mask. And some of these, particularly the staph and the strep, can obviously cause that. So, it's not without any clinical consequences. I mean, thank God, I haven't heard of cases of meningitis or severe bacterial pneumonias, but, I don't know how carefully they're being looked for. But the point was that here you have this intervention, which has, unlike the 18 and above, where we've gone over the randomized controlled trial data, it's all negative. This issue hasn't even been studied in children, and yet they're being held captive with these masks to this day.
All right, just a little bit of a funny here before we get into some more serious stuff on vaccines and all that. I like to show my little funnies here and there, and this is going to hold true whether it's hydroxychloroquine or whatever. So, you start off with, boy, this virus could have come from a lab. Yeah. But as soon as someone says, oh, yeah, Trump thought so, too. Right. We got to throw that away, regardless of what all the medical research, regardless of what the data shows, regardless of what the truth is, because it's politics and because everyone hates Trump. We can't. Any theory he puts out has to be wrong, right?
And now the preponderance of the evidence is actually shifted towards that actually is the most plausible etiology, that it came from the lab. There are biochemical features of the virus that suggest it could not have been generated naturally. A typical zoonosis going from an animal to human beings. that it's more likely to have been, particularly the way the spike protein is fused to the SARS in this case. It looks like it was developed in a lab and maybe passed through human cell lines, and that's Mike. I'm not a virologist, but that is the preponderance of
what we do know is there are many never labbers as in laboratory,
but
who are now open to the idea. Maybe.
Well, they're now because they don't feel as if they're going to be pilloried and punished. They're now willing to share what they thought all along in an open, candid way. Making use of their professional skills, which is sad, but at least it's finally happening.
All right. Couple of things on vaccines. You've been warning for months, and probably other than probably on no other, I'm sure no other show in this state, and I doubt too many other shows even across the country have discussed this in as much detail as you and I have, and as our viewers have seen. But you've been concerned, that people who have had the virus and have recovered probably don't need the vaccine, and especially because the vaccine seems to pose more risk to younger populations than the virus does.
Right.
And here's a story that you talk about on your Twitter. We like to share your tweets here. That a healthy, why don't you tell the story? Go ahead. I'll just leave it
well, up. I was aware of this story about a month ago, and there's a new wrinkle to it. I was aware of the young man who really was, as the mother described, appeared to be an elite basketball player, high school basketball player in the state of Utah. I think like 6'10" and still growing. And he, because of, as she explains it quite well, and this is the first time I got the full explanation, the whole family was vaccinated because they felt tremendous pressure. He might be barred, and this, it's tragic. I mean, he was hoping for full college scholarship, et cetera. It would, if he wasn't vaccinated, it would limit his opportunity to play in tournaments that might require vaccination. So they felt compelled to get him vaccinated, and the whole family got vaccinated. I guess they traveled together. So he came down with, first it presented as neck swelling, and it was blown off by the local pediatrician within a few days after the first dose, Mike, which is what makes this even more unusual, after the first dose of the Pfizer mRNA vaccine. And ultimately, it became intolerable, and he had much worse symptoms. He wound up hospitalized and in the ICU with not only clots in the venous system of his neck, but in the venous circulation of his brain. But by a couple of weeks, it sounds like, after that, his father was admitted with multiple pulmonary emboli. They were all vaccinated the same.
What's a pulmonary emboli? What's that?
Pulmonary emboli are clots that typically start out in the legs, the legs, and work their way through the circulation, and then get expelled into the lungs with the contraction of the heart.
Okay.
So they can be deadly. The father, it's lucky the father's alive. But the point is, I would surmise that the family probably has some subclinical tendency towards thrombosis, but that's genetic. But then you get an environmental hit, like the thrombogenic nature of this vaccine, and they present it with this fulminant syndrome that includes it getting cerebral thromboses and the father getting pulmonary thrombosis.
All right. So in addition to, it does look like here, again, you just pretty much explained, I just want to put it in my words, that it seems as if some people, since this was a father and son, and apparently not the mother, because she's got different genetics, obviously, that apparently there is some genetic disposition of some people to be a little more at risk from the vaccine than others.
Exactly. So what would typically happen in a case like this, and I don't know what the details are, I assume some of this has happened, is that they would look up for, they would work both the father and the son up for genetic predispositions towards clotting. And usually it would be of a mild form. which may be slightly more common than the rarer, more severe forms. But a lot of those people go through their entire life without ever presenting this way. Something else, it's, call it an insult, call it something, has to happen environmentally to trigger a person like this, into a state of hospitalization.
All right, so let me sum it up this way. And you correct me if I'm wrong. If I'm right, just say I'm right. I'm going to move on to something else. So when it comes to these decisions, should K through 12 students, should college students, should even, as you said, even people under 30, healthy people, be vaccinated? It appears, this is my language, but it appears that regardless of your genetic makeup, that for those healthy populations, younger adults and children, there is virtually no risk with the virus. But there does appear, and again, still on a minimal basis, but certain people with certain genetic makeups, there is some risk, minimal as it may be, to the vaccine. So you've got to really think about this. Do I want to go to virtually no risk from a situation to where there's some risk? I mean, is that a fair way to put it?
I think that's absolutely, I think that's a very lucid way to describe it, Mike. And I saw some interesting data from the province of Manitoba where they apparently have reported that that even as high up as age 45, they have not been able to find anyone who died from COVID who was free of comorbidity. So, in other words, it is supportive of what you're saying, that really, and this is what I said all along, and why I was so shocked at the launch of the whole vaccination program is, again, the paradigm I thought they were going to use was pneumavax for pneumococcal pneumonia, which has been given for a number of years now. Even with penicillin and other antibiotics available, there's still a morbidity and mortality from old pneumococcal bacterial pneumonia. So people that are at risk, and they tend to be older and diabetic, are targeted for this vaccine. Certainly once they reach age 65, but even a diabetic that's not well controlled from 18 to 64, they get pneumavax. But the rest of the population isn't dragged in and given pneumavax. It's just and so this would fit the more traditional model of vaccinating the high risk population.
Right.
And maybe when there is a more severe outbreak, expanding that out a little, but not doing that with an experimental vaccine.
Okay, got it. Now, the tragedy here, again, based on everything you've been telling us for months, is that it appears this basketball player in Utah had tested positive for COVID earlier and probably already had whatever antibodies he needed and didn't have to put himself at further risk by taking that vaccine.
He was exposed earlier and must have had an asymptomatic case, because what the mother reported on Tucker Carlson last night was that when he was only tested when he was already hospitalized. And lo and behold, they found that he had these nucleocapsid antibodies, which are not the antibodies that the vaccine produces. The vaccine being a spike protein.
So you can distinguish between the two.
Anti-spike antibodies.
Okay.
So that's prima facie evidence that he had a natural infection.
All right, let's shift to Rhode Island. You, in discussions earlier today, you had mentioned that it is now on the CDC VAERS reporting database that we now know of 3 adverse reactions of young people in Rhode Island to the vaccine?
Oh, 3, not 3, what looked to me in reading the case reports to be bona fide examples of post-vaccine myocarditis.
Serious? Is this hospitalization level stuff?
Pardon?
Is this hospitalization?
All 3 hospitalized. All 3 cases were hospitalized. And again, VAERS is catch as catch can. And typically there's underreporting to VAERS. There's a lot of noise in VAERS too, but overall there's underreporting into VAERS. We've had 3 cases, and
those just most recent 3 or 3 in total throughout this whole vaccination period?
They're 3 from 17 to 20, so that's a very recent group of people, young men that have been vaccinated, young people that have been vaccinated. And I believe I sent you a statement from an anesthesiologist who happens to be a state representative in Maryland. and he's calling for a moratorium on administering vaccines to young people, certainly college age and below, and objecting strongly. I wish we could get someone like this in our state, Mike. Yeah, there it is. Objecting, Congressman Representative Harris from the state of Maryland, objecting strongly to the mandates at university level. In other words, until this issue, and this is just one issue, Mike. This is just the myocarditis issue. He wants there to be a moratorium until at least this issue is resolved. And Mike, the problem with all of this has been the difficulty. And now that I'm really trying to get up to speed on the literature, it's not clear how common myocarditis is as a background event in the population. The estimates are all over the place.
Myocarditis is inflammation of the heart muscle?
Inflammation of the heart muscle itself, and it's seen in these cases often with pericarditis. So it's called myocarditis or myopericarditis. The pericardium is literally this sac that the heart sits in.
Yeah.
And both, can cause serious problems, sudden death, but they can also have more mild courses. The problem is both determining how common they are and determining what the long-term sequelae are, what the long-term consequences are, especially when they happen in young people. And so, Mike, what I've tried to do for myself since the basic rates, again, when you review the literature, the basic rates are so poorly understood, is I went back, and VAERS has these, very arbitrary cut points for age groups. So it's 6 to 17. So obviously, very few kids have been vaccinated under 12, but you have to lump in that whole age group, 6 to 17, and then 18 to 29. So I looked at 6 to 29-year-olds. And again, that's basically going to be 12 to 29-year-olds for COVID. For influenza, it's the whole age gamut. So I just want you to understand that from the get-go.
Right.
So I looked at 20 years of influenza vaccines from 2000 to 2021. And my rough estimate is that would be a denominator that's at least 10 times larger than the number of vaccines that have been given in less than 6 months. In the case of this age range, probably more like 4 months or so, to 12 or 6 to 29-year-olds. In 20 years of influenza vaccines into the VAERS system, the same system, there's been 34 cases that were associated myocarditis and myopericarditis in 20 plus years. In less than 6 months, probably about 4 months, 384 already in this age range for
so 10 times as many incidents with 6 times fewer possible cases. Yeah.
And given the denominators, you could multiply the 10-fold increased risk by probably another 100-fold.
Yeah. So it's like a 60 times, 100 times greater risk. Yep.
It's just astronomically different.
All right.
Same thing when you look at hospitalizations, when you look at life-threatening events. There's already more hospitalizations and more life-threatening events in the 6 to 29-year-olds, given the COVID vaccines, than there were in 20 plus years.
You were on this data early, and the trends just keep continuing. Now, you had mentioned earlier, I wonder if there's any medical person in our state delegation or anywhere,
yes,
who would A, have the credibility to write a letter like this, and B, would have the courage. And I don't think that person exists in our state. So what do you think, Andy? How about you and I talk offline, and maybe because you're an adjunct scholar with our center, maybe you and I can craft a statement and put a call out to universities and school systems to think twice before they put on.
I think it's absolutely. We could hold off maybe until the CDC reconvenes tomorrow. They're addressing this issue. Yep. My concern, though, there, Mike, is that they'll given
they've done a special emergency study on this, right?
Yeah, so they reported their data, which even they were alarmed with last Thursday, and they said that they were going to reconvene tomorrow and maybe make a recommendation one way or the other. My suspicion is, though, that they would do something sort of mealy-mouthed, like say, well, maybe they shouldn't get 2 doses or something. or something like that, since most of the cases happen after the second dose.
Well, we'll see what they say, but let's have that conversation offline. Again, we're not
But
just
Mike,
trying
it wouldn't address that horrible scenario of the father and son from Utah, because that happened
first dose.
in terms of thrombosis after the first dose.
Yeah.
And now we know, what might have made it even worse for the son, or maybe the father too, because it's the same household, is that they may have both been previously infected. We certainly know the son was.
So it's almost like, I mean, when you've already got antibodies of one kind, now you get, would it be akin to saying it's almost like an overdose?
Well, it certainly.
I mean, would that be loosely close?
No, but Mike, well, in this domain, yeah, it's analogous, because what happens is you look at the antibody titers, the antibody levels, and if someone's been previously infected, you see a whopping increase beyond what you would get in a person that had been uninfected from the same dose. So yeah, and now maybe in certain instances, in many instances, that's tolerated. And in fact, the vaccine, proponents would say, well, that's actually better. They'll probably have better immunity. We don't know if that's true, but we are beginning to sense that these people are at increased risk for side effects. And in fact, where it's been studied in healthcare workers, in the UK, I believe also in Germany, there's about 3 studies now that show that if you've been previously infected and vaccinated, you have a much worse adverse event profile, both for moderate events and for more severe events.
You've been saying that for months as well. All right, Dr. Bostom, we're out of time. Once again, a wealth of information. Thank you again, and we'll look forward to catching up with you again next week. Thanks, Andy.
Bye-bye.
Dr. Andrew Bostom. Wow. Listen, this guy's been right on everything, and you've only been hearing it here. Only here. I don't even know if anybody in the country has been covering it like we have. I mean, this is a man who's not only a top-notch epidemiologist, he's a great researcher, he studies the data, and he's not afraid to make conclusions that go against the status quo. And speaking of the status quo, again, that's our theme all day today, right? That the narrative is becoming the God. Remember in our song, To This We've Come, there's a line to the effect that, now to men we must pray and not to God. So the analogy here was now to the narrative, man-created narrative we must be holden to, and not to the truth, the God-created truth. Look, the narrative we saw with the TCI, there's this narrative of climate change that's going to be existential emergency. That's false, but that's the narrative. There's this narrative that little Rhode Island can do something to change global world temperatures. That's a false narrative, but yet public policy is moving forward based on that false narrative. In our Save Women's Sports segment, the narrative is that men can become women. That's the narrative. That is scientifically false. And the narrative is it is their right to compete unfairly. Transgender women, once men, now pretending to be women, that they can compete, no matter how unfair it is, against women. That's the narrative. When we just showed you the video today of how unfair that is, but that truth doesn't matter. The narrative matters. With Rep. Morgan, how many of those bills that we talked about with her are based on the false narrative created by the left, perpetrated by the media? Election, and that somehow we can do online voting and do it in a secure way. We know that's not true, but the narrative wants you to think it is. And now, of course, with Dr. Bostom, whether it comes to masks, whether it comes to vaccines, they're telling us a narrative, they're selling it, they're putting and we over and over again are showing the narrative is false, or at least has its major holes in it. If you're going to put a narrative out, at least say, well, here are the exceptions to the rule. No, the narrative is supreme. The narrative has become God. To men we must pray, not to God. Folks, we're in a sad place. We're in a sad place. What are we going to do about it? Best we can do is keep raising awareness. We'll give you the calls to action. We showed you one earlier today. rifreedom.org/TCI. We'll be giving you more. Again, as I told you, I'm looking forward to my Sunday best day, to the people who inseminate day. But today, with the budget being released and some of these sad truths exposed by Dr. Bostom, it's one of the worst days. So on that sad note, we'll say good day and we'll see you next game.